In this one, we're going to be talking about why the GOP is basically making its case for extermination from the political realm. Now, for this, we need to actually look at what the GOP should be standing for and what it shouldn't. When you start to look at what they should be standing for on all these things with it, you'll see that basically the best idea on politics is to go back to the advocates quiz and to look at their quiz results and actually start to look at how they actually shape out their actual look on both personal liberty issues and economic liberty issues. And you'll basically see that when most people tend to view the actual spectrum as a linear line with it, it actually isn't. It's actually best described as a diamond. I've seen even other types of people try to describe it as a square, but that's really inaccurate. And it's basically in the center, you're going to have as a moderate, to the left, a progressive, to the right, a conservative, to one end of the diamond, you're going to have a libertarian. To the other end, you're going to have authoritarian. Now, on the progressive side of authoritarian, you're going to have, obviously, that's kind of where socialist is. To the right, right side of authoritarian, that's where nationalist sits. And really, this really kind of explains why the GOP is kind of eliminating itself. Now, the GOP should have its membership in the conservative spectrum. Now, if they're more on the idea of theoretically listening to the words of Ronald Reagan, who basically stated the core of the core of conservatism is libertarianism, they should actually be more on the idea of trying to lean more toward being a libertarian. That means they should actually be moving more into the spectrum of being a libertarian. Now, the problem being is that we are not seeing anyone in this realm. We're seeing all of them tend to either A, basically fully embrace nationalism, B, support nationalism, or C, be cowards and think they can corral nationalism, so they're actually going to basically support it in such a way that they're not going to basically kind of half-heartedly support it. Now, you do have a few people who are basically traditional on the conservative side that they're labeling as quote-unquote anti-Trumpers. This is basically a small list. I mean, it is very, very small. This is the problem. They're actually currently in power. Now, when you start to look at this is the actual problem that they're dealing with. Most people would say with it, okay, well, when you're dealing with this whole spectrum on this right side authoritarian, well, essentially under Trump with it, we need to look at how Trump got elected in 2016. He did not really have much. He lost a lot of those traditional conservatives. Now, the way he made it up was he was making a lot of promises to libertarians, saying that he was going to end wars, he was going to audit the Federal Reserve, go to a gold standard, get out of a lot of these NGOs that were actually impeding in the United States making their own free will decisions on international affairs. He was not going to basically be a pawn to a lot of foreign countries, and starting to make all these statements with it. Yes, a lot of libertarians were really not exactly fans of the idea of a wall, but they mostly thought that the wall was not likely going to be built, and that he was. But they basically felt that, okay, if he could do these few things, that and also he's talking about reducing taxes, reduction of taxes and reduction of spending. They are thinking basically, if he does these things are positive, and these things are actually going to be a benefit. He was also talking some certain things that are actually on the personal liberty end as well, such as he was initially talking about expanding legal immigration as well as things like that with it. And what ended up happening was he ended up being a turncoat on everything going authoritarian on the national side. This is why when you saw this, he didn't have in 2018, he didn't see that he had anybody backing him in that he didn't have those traditional conservatives backing his candidates, nor did he have the libertarians. The libertarians basically told him to get bent, every one of them, or virtually every one of them. So what this meant is that anything in 2018 with it, so he got killed, meaning they had lost, they had losses in the Senate, as well as they had lost the House of Representatives, and they had experienced losses in local elections on the state level. And then when it came down to 2020, he had lost even more in the Senate, and there was actually many cases his own doing that he put doubt in the actual quality of the elections, and local elections were now being now libertarians were starting to take some of the local elections, and he lost more in the House of Representatives. Obviously, he had handed over stuff to the Democrats in the Senate, and it was even more damaging to him there. So this is showing that nationalism was not playing well. And this is something in which, when we start to view this, since he is actually at least the United States face of nationalism, that this is not something that's going to work well in the nation. So if the GOP is essentially supposed to be the opposition to the Democrats are a progressive party. The GOP is supposed to be a conservative party. The GOP has abandoned economic conservatism, and that social conservatism does not sell in the country, as we've seen, that they've essentially made their party something that doesn't draw. Because as we've seen with the actual platform, the platform is essentially against free trade, and it's against immigration. If we look merely at Pew polls with it, as well as other polls, we see that free trade and immigration are popular. Specifically, even more popular since Donald Trump was elected. This means that basically is the Republican Party has put itself at odds with the actual public. That means the public is essentially against the actual current basic platform of the GOP. The GOP is essentially at odds with everybody else, and it's basically making itself to be an extreme minority, which is why we're seeing that basically they're trying to resort to cultural war, trying to basically claim that there is a war on white people, which there isn't, that there is they were trying to basically make a big story about the Dr. Seuss books. They were actually low-selling books that were considered to be offensive anyway, that the Seuss family felt that they were going to pull in it anyway, and they were basically, as nationalists, they felt that that they should have the right to basically force the Seuss family to actually print because they felt, as a society, they felt that they had the right to force someone to print something. And this is the idea of nationalism, was essentially that they have the right over the actual individual, that society has, that the nation has rights over the individual. It's all about the national interest. And this is the whole idea of nationalism, is individuals have no rights. It's all about the nation. Theoretically, what nationalism is essentially is the idea to create one giant national prison where people can't leave, and it's all about serving the interest of the nation. Now, if that sounds horrible with it, it should, because the fact is it's about curbing personal liberty. Now, if you actually go on the idea of how that would actually plan on the actual thing of how they would do with it, is they believe that what it calls government should basically censor the media and the press, but they do agree on that with it. They're on the fence about speech with it, because and the internet with it. They want the internet they want the internet kind of adjusted with it, because they believe that the internet should be under national control. They believe the press should be censored and the media should be censored from saying anything bad about their dear leader. So they would agree on that. Military service should be voluntary. There should be no draft. They actually disagree on that. There should be no laws regarding sex between consenting adults. They actually disagree on that. Repeal laws prohibiting adult possession and use of drugs. They actually disagree on that. Government should not detain and deport undocumented workers. They actually disagree on that. Taxpayers should not be responsible for student loan. For the most part with it, they agree on that. Government should not be responsible for providing health care. They actually disagree on that. Let people own their own retirement, privatize Social Security. They disagree on that. Replace government welfare with private charity. They're usually on the fence about that. Cut taxes and government spending by 50% or more. They disagree on that. And so what you end up getting is an area which is a right-wing authoritarian. And basically is what it says on the advocates. Your type is authoritarian. Authoritarians want government to have tremendous power over the economy and personal behaviors, advocating both strong military and police powers. You are generally willing to use coercion and threat of violence to realize your ideals. You may doubt whether economic liberty and personal freedom are practical options in today's world. You certainly don't trust the chaos of free markets. The economy and culture must be centrally planned. Diverse lifestyles of free expression can stand in the way of social order or equity. So you're willing to suspend civil liberties. This is the idea of authoritarians. And if you notice with it, it's actually, if you go on the left side with it, it's actually in the same realm as being socialists. So socialists are actually in the same boat with it. They just tend to take a little more liberty at going after economic liberty than personal liberty. And that's the whole thing with. So what the current GOP has done is they've put themselves right in this area, and that's what they've done. Now, when we see these people that are even like hardcore progressives, they look like an actual huge change when it comes down to it. And and if people want to know why even some libertarians voted for Biden, that's why when him being on kind of the fence between a progressive and a moderate, they see that he's basically, at least when it comes down to it, a jump when it comes down to the whole movement. And it ends up kind of sliding things away. And this is the whole point. Now, when we this is kind of where it comes down to things, and where we end up seeing, and we end up seeing that basically is that, and that was at the current point with it. Obviously, it would probably get much worse under where Trump was sitting at. And that this is something which is this is something which we look at, and we see that where they're actually, sorry for the break, but this is something where you look at, and we'd actually look at where they've actually gone. Now, what is their actual function going forward? Now, if they keep on this actual pace, this means that they're actually not this means they're not actually within the realm of reality when it comes down to the actual people of the country. And they're not anywhere close to within the realm of what normal people actually think. This is why when we're talking that no one actually believes that they should actually continue existing. And this is why when we're seeing that they actually opt for these ideas of voter suppression, and why we're finding even out in like states like Texas, where they were actually using they were trying to use voter suppression out in like Harris County to stop mail-in ballots from actually getting out to people for applications for them, because they knew it could actually potentially flip the actual state to the opposition, and that would have actually have caused issues with it, and that would have if the state would have actually flipped blue, that would have made it far worse for Donald Trump with it. That's why when we started to look at the numbers with it specifically, I mean, even if we looked at the numbers in Texas with it, they did not even follow anything reasonable. It looked like someone had put their thumb on the scale, because no one would have thought it reasonable that Trump's numbers would have actually gone up, when specifically we see a major commodity being oil had actually been hurt during those years for the actual production costs. In fact, oil had actually, petroleum had actually gone into the negative. That actually meant that they would have theoretically had to shut down the pumps and actually theoretically lay off workers, or at least temporarily put workers on break during those times, because there was a massive oversupply. And this is an actual issue with it, and especially being such a massive petroleum state as Texas is, there had been no legitimate reason to actually support a candidate such as Donald Trump. Why would you support someone that is actually financially ruining your state? And that's why it was viewed as essentially the election as being purple, because all of the urban areas were essentially for Biden, whereas these suburban, whereas they were saying like other areas around it were actually for Trump around it. And this is something in which would have actually swung in Biden's favor, and it would have actually made the race extremely close. And it looked like, basically, at least in my opinion, that's why I felt that there should have, that was one of the states that I felt there should have been a recount in. But being that there's a lot of laws in Texas that don't allow for a recount, to try to suppress a lot of illegal activity that the GOP does in that state, that it didn't happen. And I felt, and a lot of people, when I was stating these things, a lot of people on the right were actually going after me, and I felt that there were some illegal shenanigans there. And apparently, with refusing to send out mail-in ballots, apparently I was right. And that shows you that basically, if they can't win without actually cheating, if you can't basically win on your ideas alone, you have no business going there with it. If you have to basically suppress the vote, you don't have any good ideas, and your party should go extinct. And this is the whole idea with it: is the person with the best ideas should win. And if your ideas are poor, you shouldn't basically do, I'm going to go to the fullest extent of my power to, at this time, to basically suppress the vote, to basically stay in power desperately. And this is essentially what they're doing, because they're scared what would happen if they actually get bumped out of power, that there could actually be a massive decline in the actual party, and the party would actually die out. And they know this, that basically the party would become nothing. And they know that basically that they would actually have to come up to what more modern people would want. And it's basically across the board with it, that basically that they would have to adapt to the modern voter and actually lure them in. They couldn't just come up with whatever garbage. And especially if we came up with a party with multiple people, they couldn't just pull this garbage with multiple parties on the ballot. They that actually had access to the general election debates. They couldn't pull this garbage, because the fact is if you were able to see all of those people and all those parties were on the ballot, they couldn't and not try to sue to get them off the ballot. Traditionally, we've seen both parties sue to get them off the ballot, to get these parties off the ballot. But when we start to see that, and saying that these third parties, they have to get so many signatures to get on the ballot. Well, the fact is the Democrats and Republicans don't have to. They go, but they got enough votes in the previous year. Yeah, that's because they're they're permanently put on the ballot. If you actually if you actually made all these parties do it, and if a party had a bad reputation, I guarantee you would have a real hard time getting enough signatures, and it would actually waste a lot of resources for them to get these signatures, and they'd probably realize that they couldn't get the signatures. And especially with it in certain states with it, I guarantee you in certain states, especially blue states, they wouldn't be able to get those signatures. I guarantee it. For the amount that they would need. They're not going to find that they're going to, especially like Democrats would not be able to get enough signatures in hard red states just as much as you would probably have Republicans have a hard time getting them in hard blue states. And you would find that this would be very difficult. So they would theoretically, if you follow those laws with it, they would have that. Or we could actually have all of these parties, including third parties, on the ballot with it, and let them on the main debate stage. But the fact is, they're scared what would actually happen. You could actually theoretically have a third party president, and this is something which they're fearful of. Now, we've also seen talk where the GOP goes, well, if you don't if you don't basically put someone who is completely friendly to us in all of the debates, who is actually doing the debates with it, we're not going to participate in these debates. Well, we're not talking about what ended up happening in a pandemic year. The next one's not going to be a pandemic year, and I guarantee it with that. So what's going to happen is that they're going to basically, we're not going to have, and I guarantee you, in the history of everything with it, we're not going to have no debates. So what's going to happen is they're going to have to deal with essentially what's going to happen is the debates are going to be held with whoever the next highest party is, which is going to be the Libertarian Party. So the Libertarian Party will go with it, and I guarantee you is you're going to have someone like Biden as well as Harris who are going to want to participate against the Libertarians because it's going to make them look good. That's going to be a positive thing for them. The only thing it's going to do is it's going to start to marginalize the GOP, and they know it. If they they reach their hands out to those libertarians with it, that they know if they start to come out and start to basically come in favor of some of the libertarian ideas on the personal side, it will actually help them. And they might be able to pick up on some ideas of what to do to actually get some of these ideas on personal freedom through. And they might actually pick up some positive ideas throughout the actual debate process. And it would actually be beneficial for the Democrats if the Republicans didn't want to compete. And this would be something, and it would actually start this essentially extinction process in which the GOP is looking toward. I mean, the GOP continues to want to go with this nationalist ideology. They're going to go away. When you had the Democrats as a progressive party, you had the third largest party as being libertarian. I mean, it shows it shows at least on a personal liberty score that it's all further away. And it basically views itself further away from being abusive toward the people and using coercion. It's either moderate levels of coercion or limited levels of coercion. And this is going to be something in which the GOP is going to have to contend with. If the GOP is trying to force violence among the people with it because they don't like the way you're living, and if this is their basis, they're not going to actually work, and they're going to go the way of the dodo. And there are plenty of political parties who have actually tried this approach and who've gone into non-existence. And this is something which the GOP is going to have to contend with. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that it's not going to be negative. This move is going to be negative for the Democrats. That's why the Democrats are actually hoping that the GOP doesn't go into extinction, because obviously when we start to look at the comparison with the libertarians actually do essentially anything that they can do, anything that progressives can do, but better, as well as they can do anything the conservatives can do, but better. And it would take a while for conservatives to actually regroup to form a legitimate conservative party. And by then, the libertarians would essentially take a hold of that group and then become extremely dominant. And you would have essentially you'd essentially have a dominant party, and you'd have the liberals as like a secondary party, and you would have theoretically the any party that would come about the extinction of the GOP in a conservative realm would basically be relegated to a third party, and they would be so small that it would be non-existent if they would even have the ability to even get people on a national or even a state level, because it would be too difficult to get in there unless they'd come to a multiple party system, and then they would still be marginalized because of the massive mistakes that they went with the GOP that's pushing toward extinction. And now, yes, the Democrats were pushing toward extinction on a financial level as a party with it before, but they've been able to actually solve that issue. And that's far different than what we see now. What we see now is basically a party that is not on the level of extinction, and is actually doing some fairly smart moves when it comes down to advocating on their actual viewpoint. And they're actually doing some things in which are not bad when it comes to their view from their worldview. If they would actually if they would actually push a little bit harder on not go on a light standing with it, but actually go a little harder on what would be on personal liberty issues, on what libertarians would like with it, they could probably get libertarians to support them on a much higher level, and get libertarians in many cases to abandon any possible support in any possible future of the GOP, because the GOP does not really offer much with it, because they really offer fake concessions when it comes down to economic conservatism, because they preach economic conservatism but never deliver it. And I'm basically going to cut it here. I know it's a little bit of a shorter video than what I normally do, being around just here over 30 minutes, but I've already done one today with it. Tomorrow I'm probably going to go on how both parties are kind of really fake. Both the duopoly are kind of fake when it comes down to upholding the Constitution. I don't know if I've already gone over that subject before. I'll have to look over everything, but that's about it. And bye, everyone.